very unstable region, and consequently it still inspires me because I always find that there's a lot of stories to be told. This actual story started 3 years ago. I was living in Beirut and something similar had happened actually. I was watering my plants and the water actually fell on one of the workers who were remodeling the street beneath me, and we had a little bit of a heated exchange. And I actually told him what the guy tells him, So my wife at that time told me, how could you speak to someone like this? You cannot say such things to a Palestinian. It's very, very offensive. And she says, well, don't you go down and apologize? So I went down and I apologized. But the guy was pretty hurt, but that was the end of it. The problem, the issue didn't take more than that. It was resolved right away. And a couple of days later, I went up to I was in my apartment, I started thinking, I said, what if the story started with such an insignificant problem, on such an insignificant verbal disagreement, and then it evolved, and it gets more and more complicated progressively. And I started getting the idea. That's how the origin of the idea started. I just want to tell you something, actually. I wrote that film with Joël, my partner, my writing partner. We did several films together. The hardest part, not the hardest part, the part of the screenplay that took us the longest time to resolve was how the verdict should come out in the end. Is the Palestinians should be guilty or not guilty? And we spent, the issue was very simple. Whether the judge at the end come up with a guilty verdict, it wouldn't change anything in the story. Or if she says it is guilty, it wouldn't change anything. It was just a decision we had to make. It wouldn't affect at all the progress of the story. We had to go either way, it would still work. And after having thought a lot about it, we decided that it should actually end up not guilty. Because Tony, a couple of scenes earlier, has gotten what he wanted. He wanted the apology. And the minute he got his apology, no matter what the verdict, he was going to be fine with it. More than that, the fact that the Palestinian, that Yasser, got acquitted. I did a close-up on Tony, and you notice he had a little bit of a hidden smile, like he's okay with that decision. He kind of like overcame his wound. That's it, the things have gotten resolved. And the other things that actually made it more interesting, we thought that it's true that the lawyer, the girl, the daughter, Nadine, won the case, but it puts her in a very tight spot because she made her father lose. So it kind of switched, it kind of like created also an unresolved thing in her mind. That's why we went for this. Even though it's such a simple thing, it really took us the longest time to resolve. But there's a lot of little stories I can tell you. I wrote this film in English because I wrote the entire thing in English because I lived 18 years of my life in the States. So I worked in Los Angeles. I was an assistant camera. So I sort of learned the language and the structures in filmmaking. So I felt very comfortable with it. And when I went back to Beirut a couple of years ago to shoot it, we shot in 2017 actually. My mom is a lawyer and she served as a legal counselor on that film. She was the legal advisor. I wanted to do it the way an American court happens. It means you have a jury system. And in Lebanon there's no jury system. It's the judge who decides. So I told my mom, what about if we do it the American way? She says, you want to do it the American way? Fine, but nobody will believe it in Beirut. Which is true, but I did not want the verdict, the final verdict, to be taken by just one judge. I wanted to be, what's interesting about jury is you can have a majority, it's contested. If it's one judge, it's not contested. And then my mom told me there are exceptional cases in Lebanon. When a case is very complex, they actually hire 3 judges. But it doesn't get often, and I got what I wanted, because at the end, as you notice, I wanted 2 vote yes and 1 vote no. That way it creates, we did not want to give unanimous vote that he's not guilty. That's how it happens. So we made a look. What can I tell you? When I think about what was going on through my mind after we done the movie, the press, because the film was just released in Beirut in September. The United States is the second release that's going to happen January 12th. So I've done a lot of press, and a lot of journalists keep asking me, like what you asked me later, what was behind the story? What was going on? it's still taking me time right now to figure it out. What was that subconscious working in me and Joel to be able to write the story? Because it was not based on a book or based on an incident. That's something that really came out of us. And the more I've been asked that question, before yesterday, the guy from the LA Times asked me that question, which forced me to start thinking. What was going on subconsciously in your mind beside writing the story? I mean, we knew how the story is going to be. It's about a guy who evolves at the end, who believes in justice. The other guy does not believe in justice. We figure it out. But I think behind the screenplay, there is something that has been building up probably in me and Joel's mind for quite a long time, because we grew up during the civil war in Lebanon. I am still trying to understand why we did it. And sometimes writers don't know why you did it. It just comes out. And it takes a lot of times to figure out the hidden psychology behind it. But I think, and I assure you, my friends, that I don't have all the answers. I'm still elaborating, but I think because I grew up in Beirut during the Civil War, where I witnessed hands-on a lot of injustice. And when I mean hands-on a lot of injustice, it's not something that we heard on the news or we read on CNN or by the book or something that is said. We literally lived it. I personally, me, my family, and just as most of the population in Lebanon, we lived through a moment where, as a child, growing up, as a teenage, I used to say, it's unfair. That's unfair. I would get stopped at a checkpoint, and the Syrian would ask, the Palestinian would ask, everybody had occupied Lebanon at one point, and everybody had committed certain abuses. And as a child, you're growing up, you're reacting on a very simple level. It's not a complex issue. It's not complicated to understand. It's not psychoanalysis. It's so empirical. It's so pragmatic. You get stopped, you get down. My dad used to cross the checkpoint to get bread. The militia would stop and would dump bread, and my dad was beaten. There are a lot of things, and you as a child, you grow up with all these things, and you say, but it's not fair. And then you grow older, and then you say, but there's no justice. Why nobody's saying something? I think, and it's still, I'm working it out with you, and eventually I'll probably be able to put my hands clear on it. I think the fact that I've witnessed in the Middle East so much injustice going on, maybe somehow subconsciously I wanted to do this film. Because Tony Hanna believes that injustice was done to him and he could never reclaim justice. And I think this is I think so. I'm still in the process of trying to put my finger on it. But we never know. But the idea of fairness, to be fair, is something that is so important to me, especially when I moved to Los Angeles and taken a lot of distance, geographical distance, emotional distance. I think what happens is when you live in the States, no matter what we think of the Western world, you are still innocent till you're proven guilty. You are still having a system that somehow protects your right. In the Middle East is a place where your rights are not necessarily protected. You are guilty until you're proven maybe less guilty. It's still a system that is still trying to work itself out. And the fact that I left in '83 and didn't come back till '98 to do my first film, probably that distance and having lived and understood what is it to be an American, what is it to be from the Western world, maybe allow me to have also some understanding what the concept of justice is. And please believe me, I'm not making a philosophical statement. What I'm telling you is so pragmatic. I live it day to day. It's not a big analogy or something. It's really, we live it. We live it completely. That's all. And what you should know also is very interesting. I grew up from a very left-wing family. My parents were very militant, not carrying weapons, but they were very involved in the revolution in the 50s and the 60s, in the 70s also. And my parents are very left-wing liberal. And we grew up always, at that time, believing that the Palestinian cause is the mother of all causes. That's how we were raised. Everybody has his thing. Joelle, who became my wife later, grew up in a small village outside of Beirut. It's called Big Faya, which is the founding place of the right-wing militias that actually fought the Palestinians. So she comes from what we call the Christian side back then. Things have changed today. Today you do not have that barriers anymore. I mean, things have evolved. But she comes from a family that actually was very militant, anti-Palestinian, and I come from a family that was very pro-Palestinians. So when we decided to write this screenplay, we came up with an idea of switching roles. I said, you know, Joel, how about if I write the scene of the lawyer defending the Christians, and you write the scene of the lady lawyer who's defending the Palestinians. So it allowed us to have a little bit of empathy toward our characters. I mean, I have evolved throughout the years. You know, I was much more adamant about what I believed back in the 70s than Joel was. And somehow, throughout the years and the distance, you know, you kind of become curious to understand the other point of view. That's what I wanted to say. I grew up thinking that the others does not have a point of view. You don't have a story, you don't have a narrative. Be it whether you were Jewish back in the 70s, I grew up thinking that the Jews don't have a narrative. I believe that the Christians did not have a narrative. That's when you grow up like this, with time and space going on, having emigrated and left for 18 years. It allowed me somehow to see, okay, this is how I was raised, but let me look at that rock and see what's behind it. I know that narrative. I know that you guys don't have a narrative, but how about I try something else? And that's how you start evolving, is when you sit with your adversary and you sit face to face. That's how I was able to understand the other people's perspective. It's really, I believe, when you meet your adversary or your enemy face to face, a huge wall comes down. And that's what happened to me in 2012 when I went to Israel to shoot the other film that I did called The Attack. And that was the first time, you know, it was very risky venture that I did by going to Israel, because as a Lebanese citizen, I'm not allowed to go there from a Lebanese perspective. Back then, I went in 2012 with an American passport. That's why I was allowed, and which caused me a lot of problems, as some of you might know. But it's worth it. I believe, as artists, as filmmakers, as writers or journalists, we are supposed to build bridges. We are supposed to cross borders. This is what we do for a living. You know, you take a subject, it's one of those forbidden subjects, but for us, there are no forbiddens. And you go for it, and you say, fuck it, I'm gonna do it. That's how it goes. So that's how it happens.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
I can repeat the question.
Looking for films that depict the region in a humane way, in an honest way. I congratulate you on the success of your film, but one area that I think was lacking for me is I don't think it really touched on the true atrocities and the difficulties that Palestinians face in Lebanon. Palestinians are the world's largest refugee population, and they are scattered all throughout the Arab world, but their situation is the absolute worst in Lebanon. I think the movie didn't touch on that hardly at all, other than the man not being able to legally work. And aside from mentioning Black September and what they faced in Jordan, the massacre that they faced in Jordan, I think it was a missed opportunity not to talk about Sabra and Shatila, the worst of all massacres, and the role that the Christian phalange played in that. And I'm wondering, given that you profess to have a pro-Palestinian bias, why that was not touched on when it's one of the most important historical events in Palestinian-Lebanese relations.
It's a good question, and I have my answers for you. And you know, ma'am, you are totally legitimate to ask that question. If I wanted to get involved and talk about the Palestinians' dilemma and tragedies, I would end up with a 10-hour movie. Really, it would be extremely long. It's very, very difficult. I had to take choices during the writing of focusing on what the story is. This story is Tony Hanna's story. It's not, you know, and I'm not favoring one over the other. Okay, the gentleman, I'm going to answer very quickly. I understand what you're saying. I'm going to answer you, and I can't tell you how much I understand your frustration, but you have to understand where I come from. Okay? It's very important. The ladies and gentlemen are coming up with something important. They say, why are you talking about the massacre that the Christian went through, and you're not talking about the Sabra Shatila massacre? For you who don't know, let me give you very, very quickly brief. The Sabra Shatila massacre happened in 1982. And the Christian phalange, the Christian militias went into Sabra Shatila and did a massacre that estimated between 800 and 1,000 people. We don't know exactly what's the number. I need to tell you something, and I hope that will calm you down, and I know in advance that probably won't, but you have to understand this. There has been So many films written about the Sabra Shatila massacre. Not a single person had ever come and say, why are you talking about the Sabra Shatila massacre and not about the other massacres? As if when you talk about the Sabra Shatila massacres, it becomes exclusive on its own, but when you talk about the other massacres, you have to make a link. That's what I don't agree. I think every person has the right to express his suffering. The Damour massacres does not justify the Sabra Shatila, and the Sabra Shatila does not justify. But ladies and gentlemen, if I want to talk about massacres in the Middle East, I would end up with a 15-hour movie. They are all linked all the way back to Jesus Christ.
A question back over there, please. I'm sorry, let's keep the questions related to the movie itself,
I understand your
please.
frustration. I give you my point of view. I believe that I was extremely fair in the way I treated it. I could not open new doors.
A question back there.
Can you help me understand why the not guilty verdict, I understand why it was okay inside the courtroom, but why did the not guilty verdict not explode in the community?
Because
The question is why the not guilty verdict, why didn't it explode in the community? I mean, I think it kind of did.
I mean, the film is 1 hour 50 minutes. If I wanted to explain it, I'd add another hour for the film. No, the thing is, maybe I am missing a phrase and I realize that probably it was not clear. You have to understand why the judges took the decision not guilty. She says in the dialogue, after listening to both lawyers, we came to the conclusion, we thought we should condemn both of you. We thought at one point, both of you are guilty. But, this is fundamental, we had to go back to the origin of the problem. Like, how did it all started? It started with a gutter. And the guy who violated is the Christian guy, Tony. Because this is how the film started. Technically, the guy at fault, we're talking about the gutter. We're not talking about big social event. About that very simple incident, Tony was at fault. Because he had an illegal pipe, and when Yasser came to fix it, he broke it. So you have to look at it from that perspective, that Tony was the one who's guilty, and the judge listened to all the philosophical argument, but then he was forced to come back to something much more primitive, much more simple. That guy, that's how now I believe today, because you're not the only person who says that, I should have added one extra phrase where the judge explained what I just told you. Should have said we had to go back to how the problem solved. You, Mr. Tony, you had an illegal pipe, and you stopped the guy from fixing it. We thought about writing it, but then again, I thought, maybe it would be too explanatory, so we forgot.
No, I understand that part, but the trial created such turmoil in the community, and maybe we haven't seen what comes after the verdict, but it seemed very peaceful inside.
Because our main character came to peace. This is the most important thing. The society we all know until today has not come to terms with itself. But the film is about those two characters. They came to terms with themselves. The film had to end at that point.
If I'm to close it off here, if I might inject my own.
Yes.
I mean, it's a very polarizing film. And I imagine
Not that much.
I disagree. But it also it ends on a hopeful note, at least, right?
I am an optimist. I believe that in spite of all the quagmire happened in the Middle East, me as a person, and I have to speak on my behalf because I'm the author of this film, I am an optimist in life. I believe that I like fairly happy ending because, you know, in the midst of this social upheaval that it's called the Middle East, that has been in such a fiery thing since I was born, you gotta give somehow some kind of hope. Otherwise, what's left? I had to, in a way, you know, it's very easy to start this type of film and ending in a very tragic way. I don't want to do that. I want to give hope to people. I really do. And especially, I want to give those characters hope. I think it's important in this time of age, really. What's going on in America? What's going on in the Middle East? What's going on in Spain? And I'm not speaking on a social level. I'm not an anthropologist. I did not make a film with a specific message. I assure you, I did not. But if you go back to your instinct, I wanted to end this film on a good note. That's the decision that me and Jawad made. I think it's more powerful.
And on that note, thank you, Ziad.
Thank you all for coming. I could speak to you for another hour, but I think